Just driving an Elva in a hailstorm, as you do. It's like a million tiny little bullets on my face. Welcome to the Inverlochy Castle Hotel near Fort William in the breathtakingly beautiful Scottish Highlands for something a little bit special, because we finally managed to get together the holy trinity of speedsters. Now, you've probably already got some quite strong opinions about these very fast windscreenless cars, ranging from the coolest thing you've ever seen to the most pointless things you've ever seen. All I shall say on the matter is we cannot judge these by any rational means. Yes, if it rains, we're going to get wet. If a stone gets flicked up, I'm going to get a very bruised face, and we're probably going to end the day with a mouthful of midges. But these cars are about drama and excitement, not practicality. And let's face it, they're toys for the ultra rich who crave a sense of occasion above all else. And then when they're not driving them, they want something sexy to look at and show off to their mates. Of course, speedsters are nothing new. Perhaps the most famous and beautiful was the Port 356 Speedster, which sparked a series of 911 Speedsters that continues today. But if you want the full gale force experience, you want something with the windscreen removed entirely, like the super rare Mercedes SLR Sterling Moss, Lamborghini Aventador J, or Aston Martin CC100. Or one of these, the new batch. So let's get acquainted with the cars one by one before we go for a proper razz, and we'll start over here with the McLaren Elva. Now this follows on from cars like the P1, the Speedtail, the Senna in McLaren's Ultimate Series. It's also the lightest road car that McLaren has ever made, 50 kilograms lighter than the Senna. And you'd hope so too, wouldn't you, seeing as you get literally no weather protection whatsoever. It probably has the most in common with the Senna, an adapted version of the same super stiff carbon tub. It has the same 804 horsepower twin turbo V8 too. It's the only V8 car here, but it's also the most powerful. The bodywork is basically three massive carbon fibre sculptures, which is why there's barely a shut line anywhere. And I love the way the exterior of the car just melts into the interior. Now the Elva is the only one here that has some proper aero trickery going on to save the wind from blasting your face. It's at the front, it's called the AAMS, Active Air Management System, and it's essentially a deflector that rises out of the front of the car here. Interestingly though, it's not actually that stops the wind from going in your face. What that does is create an area of low pressure behind it, which allows air to be sucked in the front bumper, turned through 130 degrees and then spat out of these vents here and over the top of your head, creating what McLaren calls a bubble of calm. We'll see about that. What about a hailstorm? Ah! And in typically McLaren fashion, they've thought of everything, including this binnacle here, which moves with the steering wheel and is shaped to channel the air towards your chest rather than at your face. And look at this, there's more. The Elva is the only car here that comes with its own bespoke helmet, and you'll notice it's got a little lip on the bottom of the visor there. That's because this helmet produces downforce. That's right, at speeds the helmet is jammed onto your head rather than air getting underneath it, trying to lift it up and strangle you with the chin strap. And look at these, you even get bespoke glasses. These are made, I'm told, to US military spec ballistics protection. They can protect your eyes from a piece of shrapnel, which is handy. I do like an accessory. I also like a bit of gold. Is it wrong that this colour is growing on me? Moving on to the Ferrari Monza. Oof, that's a good looking car, isn't it? It's also the oldest car here. It was revealed back in 2018, whereas the other two were 2020 reveals. And it's the only one that, if you're extremely selfish, can be ordered with just one seat. That's the SP1 version. This, of course, is the SP2. And in true Ferrari tradition, they're only planning to build one fewer than they think they can actually sell. So 499 Monzas in total, which is actually quite a few more than the 149 Elvas and 88 Speedsters. But then no one has a bigger black book of super wealthy, super loyal customers than Ferrari. The powertrain and platform is from the 812 Superfast, so under what has to be the biggest bonnet in the entire world is a naturally aspirated 6.5 litre V12 producing 789 horsepower, which is making me a little bit giddy just thinking about the noises that that's going to make. There was a little bit of aero trickery too, something called the virtual windshield, which is just ahead of the driver, which sucks in the air and spits it out vertically to give your eye sockets a fighting chance, but no matching helmet or ballistic specs for the Monza. A pair of Ray-Bans should do it. So the Aston Martin V12 Speedster, easily the most affordable car we've got here, £765,000, and this one's finished in the optional DBR1 livery, which pays tribute to the 1950s race car, and we very much approve because, as everyone knows, these roundels are worth at least 100 horsepower each. The engine on this car, 5.2 litre V12 twin turbo, shared with the DB11 and the DBS, but the power output sits somewhere between the two at 691 horsepower, so it's not slow. That is a lot of engine for a sub DB11 size car, and because the engine's up front, you've even got a decent amount of storage back here underneath your humps. It's probably the highest scuttle line here, the most prominent separation between driver and passenger too. Not ideal for passing M&Ms to your mate. And thank you, Aston, for fitting this optional Perspex fly screen here, which should help to keep my head attached to my shoulders. Right, enough chit chat. Let's go for a drive and let's make this interesting, shall we? Because I have the keys to all three cars here. Just gonna pop them in this helmet, give them a little mix around. Don't worry, I've done this before. And we shall drive the Ferrari first. Get in. Bit of a win-win-win that, wasn't it? What a day! Okay, a little bit of housekeeping first. If you're looking at the background and thinking, why are you driving so slowly, Jack? It's because if I do any more than 35 miles an hour, I don't think you're going to hear me. It's quite windy in here. And speaking of which, this is the first car I've ever driven that doesn't have a windscreen, so let's cut straight to the chase. How windy does it feel? Well, it's not quite the sort of blast, the wall of air in your face that you'd expect. It's not quite like a motorbike in that respect. It's actually a bit more sculpted, a bit more gentle. It does fly over your head, but there is quite a bit of buffeting. And what I've discovered is that by the time you're doing over 50, 60 miles an hour, well, you can't really hear the engine and what it's doing behind you. We know this engine, we know it's a glorious thing. It revs so freely with so little inertia. The acceleration is sensational in this car, but you're kind of traction limited. You can't hear what the rear tyres are doing, and on a slightly moist road like this, on a cold day, it's raining intermittently in about 4 degrees in the Scottish Highlands. We don't make stuff easy for ourselves. It's quite hard to know what the car's doing, so I'm using probably quarter, half throttle at most. I can't really get anywhere near this car on a road like this, so you just need to settle in, ease it in, and just enjoy the car. I should talk about this car's weight. It is 1,500 kilograms, so it's a full 250 kilograms more than the McLaren Elva, which sounds like a lot on paper, but honestly, when you're here driving it, it doesn't feel heavy. We know the 812, we know Ferraris, they feel hyper alert. You got this light steering and this super positive front end. It's a very darty, a very dynamic car, so don't read too much into that weight. And I'll tell you what I love this cockpit sensation, the fact that you're sitting here, sitting low down, helped by the fact that I'm not very tall, and surrounded by this carbon fibre strut and these door sills here. It's like you're in some sort of soapbox racer, just with your head popping out over the top. Okay, so the big question is, do I get it? Does it really add much to the experience of driving a very, very fast car, not having a windscreen? Do you know what? The jury's still out. Look, this is the first out of the 3 cars that I've driven. I'm not convinced yet. The wind plays a huge part because it's constantly in your face, it's constantly rattling your head around, it's constantly blocking out the noise from the exhaust, and I want to hear that glorious engine a little bit more. But certainly you feel this connection to the outside world, to the road. When you're turning into a corner, you're looking directly at the apex that you're aiming for. it's unique. Just one final thing that I'll say, we had to insure this car for £1.55 million. I won't tell you what the excess is because I don't want to scare the kids. But even if this was your own car, I think you'd struggle to fully uncork it on the public road because the stakes are so high, but also because the performance limits are so high you can't get anywhere near it. So yeah, is it more of an ornament than a driving tool? I'm not sure. I need to drive the others to come to my full conclusion. But look, as an advert, as a reason for us all to try and keep the internal combustion engine alive and kicking, this is a proper machine. Ah! Right, time for something even more powerful and several hundred kilos lighter. Time for the McLaren Elva. Alright, so I've got my ballistic specs on and we're good to go in the McLaren Elva. Now the first thing I want to try out is this AAMS system, the Active Air Management System, which I'm going to call ARMS. The deflector should pop up above 28 miles an hour and then it will go down again automatically at 124 miles an hour. I don't think we're going to be getting there today. The other thing to mention is you can switch it on and off, but only up to 43 miles an hour. So if I slow down a little bit, we'll go to, what, 37 miles an hour, and I hit this button here. Oh! I tell you what, that makes a massive difference. A massive difference. I don't know if you heard it on my mic. Now, McLaren describes it as a bubble of calm. I'm not so sure about that. I've still got a bit of wind whipping around my cheeks here, but you don't have that sensation that the air is attacking your face, and because of that, it means you can really enjoy the whole novelty of this experience, this panoramic 360-degree view I've got of everything. Oh, that's a game changer. That's very different to the other two cars. Now, I know what you're thinking. What happens if it rains? And we're in Scotland, so it's not a question of if it rains, but when. It already has rained twice today, in fact. In fact, we just got caught in a snowstorm, which was fun. So anyway, we put this question to McLaren, what happens if it rains? They said, don't worry too much. The switch gear is splash-proof, not waterproof, splash-proof. The seats are covered in something called ultra fabric, which looks like leather, but isn't leather and doesn't mind getting a little bit wet. And then they said, if all else fails, make sure you got the ARM system on and you drive like hell, because then the water droplets will just fly straight over your head. That's right. The Elva can outrun the rain. All right, so the engine, we know this familiar twin-turbo V8 from McLaren. It is an amazing power plant. The thrust when it comes on boost is just mind-boggling. It is staggeringly fast. If I'm honest, 804 horsepower is probably a bit too much for a car like this, but then if you're paying 1.4 million quid, you need a headline power figure. The big difference I'll mention with this, it's the only mid-engine car here, and because the engine's behind you, you get some vibrations and you get a bit of bass through your back and through the seat of your pants. You can feel and hear much better what the engine's doing, where it is in the rev range, how it's behaving, and that just helps you to control the car, know where you are, how close you are to the limit. The other two, despite having bigger, shriekier, higher capacity V12s, you can't hear them. They might as well be electric, whereas this, yeah, there's a bit of visceral sensation of a powerful engine sitting behind you. And what about the chassis and the steering, the precision, all those things that McLaren are brilliant at? Well, surprise, surprise, they're brilliant at. The steering, this is the lightest McLaren road car they've ever made. It's just spot on. I mean, they've perfected it a long time ago, haven't they? Here, it's especially good. And the precision of this chassis is spot on. I love the way that you got these big, pronounced fenders over the front wheels. Nothing new for a McLaren, but because you got an unimpeded view, they really help you place the car on the road. They're like guidelines. You just know exactly where you are. Now, I've heard this car described by some people as potentially a bigger brother to the Lotus Elise. Yeah, a much, much bigger brother because it's got 800 horsepower, but I see where you're coming from. It's got a dexterity, a nimbleness as it starts to snow. See? I told you we were in Scotland and the weather was a bit changeable. Now, I bet you're thinking, the thing is, Jack, a 720S Spider does 9/10 of what this does for a lot less money. And you're right in many ways, but what you get with this is something totally unique, this sense of connection. You can smell the air, you can feel temperature changes in the air, you can feel the hailstones on your cheeks, which isn't entirely pleasant. You are totally immersed in the business of driving this car, which you don't necessarily get with a standard Spider, and it is unique. Wow, what a machine this thing is. It's everything we love about McLaren, but just with a bit more of a sense of humour. Look at that. Anyone fancy a slush puppy? Last, but by no means least, it's time to take on the Aston. Well-worn stereotypes dictate that the Ferrari should be the fast, loud, flamboyant one, the McLaren should be the scalpel, and the Aston Martin should be the slightly more refined, more grown-up, more classic gentleman's racer that you wear a silly hat in. But honestly, from where I'm sitting, it's just as mad as the other two. It feels light, it feels sharp, it feels darty, it feels a little bit spiky actually, which brings me on to this engine. Now, we know it, we've driven it before in other cars. It's a mighty, mighty power plant, and the sensation here is basically a bottomless amount of torque and power under your right foot, way more grunt than available grip. And if I'm honest, on roads like this, I'm tiptoeing around a bit. I'm only using partial throttle. You've got to be very, very careful. The other thing is, just like the Monza, once you're doing 50, 60 miles an hour, you can't really hear the engine. It's just drowned out by the wind rattling past the side of my helmet here and over the top of my head. So you've got a very special engine, 12 cylinders and 2 turbos thrashing away in front of you. But once you've got some speed on, you're unaware that they're there. I mean, there's an argument that says you should just have small engines, 120 horsepower, and you'll be done with it. And that way you can just thrash them around everywhere on the limit. As it is, you've got to be careful with the amount of power you use. Now, what about the wind buffeting? Well, the Elva is on a different level. That AAMS system is great, it works, it changes the game really. So it's between this and the Monza. The Monza has a proper system, this virtual windscreen thing, but this is better. It basically has what looks like some sort of aftermarket Perspex Halfords fly screen just tacked on the front, but it works better than the Monza, and I'll tell you why, because it feels like you sit lower in the car. The edges are higher, the top of the door, this bridge, this beam that runs across between driver and passengers just seem that much higher. You feel out of the stream, not sat perched up in the airflow like you do in the Monza. If I had to do a 600-mile road trip in either this or the Ferrari, it would be this. Don't get me wrong, both would be uncomfortable, but this is just marginally better. So now we come to the big question. Which one of these cars is my favourite? Note, I've said favourite, personal favourite, not winner, because really they're so different. They all have such different attributes, and let's be honest, if you're a billionaire, you're probably just going to buy all three. But look, if you held a gun to my head, I love the old school vibes of this Aston. Somehow this Speedster type of car seems to suit the brand and its classical retro undertones, but it's going to be the Elva. The Elva is the one I'd take home. It just feels like a more developed car, more thought has gone into it. It's a car that you could use more often and for longer at a time. The only problem is I'm about £1.39 million short. If only there was a more affordable way to get a face full of insects. But there is another way. The Caterham way. This is the 620S, the mildly saner version of Caterham's fastest model. I say mildly because it still has 310 horsepower, weighs around 600 kilograms, and has the power to weight of a Bugatti Veyron, which is quite full on in something the size and shape of my bathtub. Normally, it comes with a windscreen, but you can remove it, as we have, and in doing so, create your own hyper speedster for under 50 grand. And what's not to like? I've got a manual gearbox, I've got all the right noises, I've got the wind in my face, I've got adrenaline coursing through my veins. Sure, it's not going to be quite as impressive as a Monza Speedster or an Elva pulling up in Monaco's Casino Square in one of these things, but for raw driving thrills, it's right up there. And that's what all four of these cars are really all about: a sense of freedom, a sense of connection to the outside world, an inability to think about your unanswered emails or anything else for that matter when you're driving them. Total immersion. You don't need a radio because you can't hear it anyway. You don't need aircon when you're permanently cold, and you definitely don't need sat-nav when it simply doesn't matter where you're going, because any journey in any one of these is an event, and that's what I love.